few of you guys wanted to see that and how that relates to our line items, right? We also, in terms of, there was some cleanup we did in the detail on the third page of this, I guess second page of this report, just cleaning it up a little bit, not having some zero balances out there. Some things that we had that were in a personnel line item that should have been administrative, we got that cleaned up. What we also did is you'll start seeing some of our transfers, right, that we kind of wait on doing until the second half of the year. You start seeing those, you'll start seeing those in the financial statements as well. So as the report shows, we're at 58.33%. We're running a little bit ahead sales tax, and I would just speak to that real quick as it relates to the economic issues surrounding the virus lockdown and those sorts of things. We did get our May allotment, our allocation this past Friday, and we have not seen any indication of any slowdown or any hits that we've taken when it comes to sales tax yet. So that's good news in terms of the second half of March. When you look at when the lockdown kind of really started, it was the second half of the month of March, and that we're still running around 2 to 2.5% ahead of our budget. If you remember that we, in the budget process, that we had assumed about a 4% growth rate, and we're 2 to 2.5% above that. So that'd be 6 to 6.5% above ahead of last year. And so we're on a pretty good clip right now. So that's both comforting and cautiously comforting, I guess is the best way to say that, because we didn't see with the last half of March, we really didn't see a slowdown. Obviously, with the biggest impact happening, or not having a 30-day data set until next time, we really won't know what type of impact, if any, this had. But so far, it looks like we've been able to weather the storm. We did not have many retail outlets that were affected by the lockdown, at least to the extent that's really affected us community-wide when it comes to sales tax. So we're running a little bit ahead, about 1.5% to 2% right now ahead of budget, which is really good news. We're obviously a little bit ahead, quite a bit ahead of interest, but that's going to be, percentages can be tricky when you're looking at such a small amount, but we do include that so you guys can see what the interest revenue is from our holdings at the bank. And then the expenditure summary, and you can look at the expenditure detail. Obviously, when it comes to debt service, we have a February and August, or when we have our payments. So we have two principal payments, three principal payments, two principal payments, 2 interest payments. We're about a third of the way through that, so we have one more left in August on the interest payment for the 2018 revenue bonds. If you remember, those 2018 revenue bonds were the bonds that we issued to purchase the land for the Joshua Station project. So aside from that, I would entertain any questions or comments you guys have on the financials. I guess Miranda, this is the speaker.
Josh, I'll just mention my wife and I went to Home Depot yesterday in Burleson, and we were shocked at the number of people, not just at Home Depot, but at all the businesses in Burleson. They were just packed yesterday. And what we found most interesting was that no one was wearing a mask. We had masks on, but we felt funny because no one else did. But all the businesses around there, Target, H-E-B, all the small shops like the nail salon, they were packed. So if that's any indication, maybe we're not going to have much of a hit to our sales tax revenue.
Well, you're braver than I am. I've gone to Home Depot twice in the past 2 weeks to pick up something and did not feel like standing in line to get in, certainly in the heat of the day when I went. Yeah, so it looks like it's one in, one out there still. I guess that's a Home Depot policy, but
they didn't have that yesterday.
Oh, really?
They were letting everyone in.
Well, then, yeah. So I guess
there was no line.
Yeah, it would have been.
We were there 2 weeks ago, and there was a line, and they would only let, so many in as so many came out.
Yeah.
But yesterday there was no line. Everybody could come in freely, no problem.
Yeah. You can.
She said her computer saying it doesn't support the audio, so I told her download it on her phone.
Okay.
All right, well, any more questions or comments regarding the financial statements?
I don't have any.
All right, then we'll move on to E, which is review the annual audit report for fiscal year 2018 and 19.
Okay, so this is a little bit in arrears. We got this audit last month from Clifton Larson Allen, our auditor. So the council's already seen this. They've already accepted this audit. Across the board, it was positive. It was a really good audit. I did not include the entire global audit in here since you guys are going to be concerned with the type A fund. So I just included the summary here for the top A. We did, if you remember, we did have an original adopted budget and an amended adopted budget. So you'll see that in the original and final. The reason there's different, they call the final whatever last, if you do one amendment or you do 3 amendments or 7 amendments, whatever the last amendment is going to be your final. So if you actually don't amend the budget, then you would have the same numbers in each column and then the actual amounts. So obviously, as we've talked about in the past, when as we've gone through budget adoption, a lot of what we do, it's projection based. We're doing our best case scenario. We have assumptions that we try to project numbers, and certainly when it comes to sales tax, certain expenditures are going to be a lot easier because we know we have a lot of hard cost. What I mean by that is we know going in what things are going to cost, so we already have them budgeted. We don't have a lot of soft costs in terms of like utilities. We have a couple of those, or one of those line items, but it's not really significant in terms of the overall budget. So we basically know there shouldn't be a lot of variance, if you will, between our final or original and our final when it comes to expenditures. It's really in the revenues and some of the beginning and ending fund balances that we kind of have to guess, because when we adopt our budget, we have internal year-end numbers for the financials, but we don't have an adopted or audited numbers. So we really don't know when we adopt the budget, we really don't know what our ending fund balance and some of our actual numbers are going to be. So sometimes, or almost every year, when we adopt the budget, it's based on an internal unaudited numbers. That's why you're going to see some variance there. But we actually don't have a lot of variance between the final and actual amounts. So we have our original, which is our adopted budget that we adopted prior to October 1st. We have the final, which is the one amendment we did, and then our actual amounts. So the actual amounts is once the fiscal year is over and the auditors go in there and they kind of make sure everything where it's supposed to be, what the numbers truly are, okay? And so, we didn't have a lot of variance at all. We did come in a little bit lower when it came into revenues. Half of that was in miscellaneous. We anticipated some the top A, that miscellaneous, that's from some residual grant revenue from the Park and Ride project that we thought would have come in by September 30th, and it didn't. So it may have come in the next day, but because of when it gets received and when it gets processed, it goes to the next year. So that's why you'll see the difference there. And then we were just a bit shy in our projections for the year ending on sales tax, so that makes up a difference there. And then you have the economic development. The negatives there are actually good. That means we save money, right? Or actually the opposite of that. We went a little bit over our final, so overall we were a little bit over in our expenditures, but it had mainly to do with economic development, how things get accounted for, and how things are, what accounts they go into and when they hit the fiscal year. So you get a little bit of this ongoing kind of accounting of things. What I mean by that is, while we focus on a 12-month period, governmental accounting is you really not goes on it's an ongoing basis. You're not going to see a lot of one-to-one. So it's very rare that you see no variance at all, just because of the way things get adopted and when they're received. So overall, when it's all said and done, we had a positive increase to the fund balance from about $90,000, about $80,000 there to the fund balance, which is good. It's something we tried to anticipate, a little bit off, but in terms of what we thought was going to happen. But overall, still a positive, very positive year. So I would entertain any comments or questions you guys have about the audit.
Just going through the numbers there. Give me a minute.
Sure. And I will say, if you're curious about in the audit, where it shows the economic development, right? You kind of get a sense of that on the financials. So the audit is going to be more catch-all categories. It's not going to be line itemed out like you'll see in a detailed financial statement. But the Joshua Station utilities, downtown infrastructure, administrative costs, that's going to translate to the economic development line item in the audit. So all that's going to be kind of lumped into that one line.
Josh, you want to put your mic a little bit closer. I think they're having a hard time.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
3, 6.
So like I say, all in all, we increased our fund balance about 90,000, which is really good.
So I guess what I'm looking at there, and forgive me if I'm missing something, but revenues, we were under by 16,000, right?
Well, that's the variance between what our final budget and what the actual numbers actually were.
Yes.
Right.
So that's
when it's all said and done, we had more revenue than expenditures by 118,000 before you look at transfers. So
Okay.
the actual amounts column is going to be what we actually did. That last column is the variance between the final budget and the actual numbers. So it shows that we did $16,000 less revenues than what we budgeted. We were over $20,000 in expenditures than what we budgeted. But when you look at what we actually did, we had more revenues than expenditures in just over 118,000. Then when you take out the $30,000 of transfers to the general fund for administrative costs, we were left with a net plus $88,000 to the fund balance. And that was a variance of only $3,600. So we got very, very close in terms of what we thought we would end up in terms of fund balance versus what we actually ended up with. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to follow the lines down because the variance at the end, that 3665.
Yeah, that's just the difference in what we thought we were going to end at and where we actually ended at. So we got really close.
Yeah, so my eyes were following the column down.
Sure.
Said we took in 16,000 less and we spent 40,000 more.
20,000 more.
Fine.
Well, 20 and then another 20. Oh, the 20. Yeah.
Yeah, the net
So-
is 40, sure.
Excuse me?
Yeah, when you're focused on the variance column, it
Yeah.
looks like we had less money than we thought was coming in, and we spent more than we thought we would.
And that 3,600 doesn't add up to those numbers.
Well, That's because that's not what the variance isn't, and it's not.
Yeah, I see it goes this way. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it goes horizontal, right?
So, yeah, I was just, when I said, give me a minute to run through the numbers, that's what I was doing, was
Okay.
looking at the columns there. Anybody else have any questions?
I don't.
I do.
Thanks for making me so stupid. No, I'm joking.
I'm sorry. I didn't do that.
Could have made up another question or something.
No, that's fine. I mean, you know, you have to look at these. I mean, just this is the first time you guys have seen this. Y'all see it once a year. You know, I see the audit for about a week before the council gets it, and so I kind of, you know, I know where to look. And sometimes when it comes to these financials, it's knowing where to look exactly. So I probably just should have at the beginning just said focus on the third column, because ultimately that's the one that really matters. So I'll take the blame for that. But no, I certainly don't intend to make anybody feel stupid.
No,
You guys always have good questions, so that's fine.
all right. Well, it looks like I was the only one slowing that down. So that was just a review. So if anybody doesn't have any more questions, I'm going to move on to item F. Discuss, consider, and take action on the approval of an economic development reimbursement request for the construction of downtown public improvements from Rumfield Properties, LLC.
Yeah, so I typically, you know, try to respect the boards and councils and don't want to read to anybody. Did everybody have a chance to look through the staff report that we put together?
Yes.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about that?
I don't.
I will say I acknowledge that we got a little bit of cart before the horse when it came to this project. When you go back, probably, I want to say maybe it's been 3 years now, when Mr. Rumfield with Rumfield Properties was working on what is now Hickory Tree. Top A and Top B at that time split the cost of some parking improvements we did. The city actually did downtown to facilitate that project, and it kind of, you know, we did that work ourselves. We did it internally with the Public Works Department to try to facilitate a tenant in that spot. It didn't really work out the way or as soon as we had hoped. Luckily, and much to Mr. Rumfield's credit, you know, he kind of decided to do it himself. I think Hickory Tree, you know, obviously in light of the virus issue, Hickory Tree has been a great success for him and our community in the downtown area. So we had, like I said in the staff report, we had started some additional conversations for some additional public parking that would facilitate the continued development of downtown. Miranda helped quite a bit on this. Mike Peacock was kind of involved at the very beginning. Miranda kind of tracked down a lot of this information from Mr. Rumfield, and he kind of had the work done before we actually had any type of formal agreement of how the reimbursement was going to work. So I would admit that you guys are kind of in a catch-22 here in terms of approving the reimbursement initially. And this is something I really want to talk to, and I'll be talking to the top B about this after you guys, is I really want to start focusing, and if it's okay with you, I really want to start focusing on what top A EDCs do and what top B EDCs do. Now, because as you guys know, because we're under the 10,000 person population, basically both EDCs can do one or the other. There's no kind of hamstringing of what you can and can't do. But because of what's going on now in terms of our development, in terms of residential development, and I think the top Bs focus on more on park development, right? And the top A's more focus on infrastructure development for economic development. I really want to start focusing on that. So when it comes to this request, I did not, initially I thought about doing it, but I thought, you know, top A needs to do it, it does. Top B needs to do it, it does. And then, you know, there's some things we're going to be able to share. And I think that the boards have been really used to sharing things, the cost of things, and sometimes it works and sometimes it makes sense. And I think in other times it doesn't. When it comes to this reimbursement and what we've been looking at, or this infrastructure improvement or capital outlay, I thought it just made sense for the top A to consider this. You guys especially in light of the audit that we just looked at. You guys are in a prime position to be able to discuss and consider this. Top B's a little bit because of their commitment to the parks and their funding of the parks part in the general fund. They have a little bit less leeway when it comes to this kind of stuff. You guys are in more of a prime position to be able to do stuff like that, like this, just like we're doing in the Joshua Station area right now. So I will, like I said, I will acknowledge you guys are kind of in the catch-22 of having to approve this after the fact. But we are tightening up some of these our processes when it comes to reimbursements for economic development. We already have several of these reimbursement type issues or agreements on the books. As you well know, when we'll talk about here in a minute, the Joshua Station agreement with Retail Connection is similar to this. Obviously, that was agreed to before we did any work. We actually had one, a lot of people may forget this, but O'Reilly's. We had a similar setup to where they did some public infrastructure improvements and we refunded or rebated them after the fact. We have a 380 with Orco International. It's a little bit different process. They get a reimbursement of property taxes based off of inventory taxes that we give them every year based on the 380. And then what's the other one I'm thinking of? I just went blank. We've had some others. The one that I'm focused on lately has been, like I say, the Joshua Station one, because it's such a big project. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this was the intention going through with this. Whether the private developer came in, and this is really what everything that we've been doing, but especially this type of issue because of the public improvements is really when you hear the term public-private partnership, this is really what we're talking about. Okay, so you have a private developer come in, does the initial investment for the community, and then the community pays that person back, usually based off of that business coming to fruition. I think it's something you guys are going to want to consider tonight. A lot of people want to come in and say, hey, I did this X, Y, and Z, brought me a check for reimbursement. And certainly you guys can talk about that. And I really wish I had done a better job of getting out ahead of this before any of the improvements were done ahead of time. But there's a number of different ways you could look at this. One of the things that kind of like we're doing with Retail Connection is the agreement is based off of they're going to do X, right? And then once those things come to fruition and you start seeing things on the ground and those investments start producing benefits for the city via property taxes, via increased sales taxes, then that's when the developer gets their reimbursements, right? So there's a number of different ways that this reimbursement can take place. If you guys decided, the improvements are there, that's kind of what the conversations were talked about. We can certainly reimburse them that way. Another way of doing it is in order to kind of, like we're doing with Retail Connection, is kind of incentivize. There's one thing to have the public improvements in place. It's another thing to incentivize there being a tenant for the area in which the public improvements were meant to serve. So we could certainly set up a situation to where that you guys approve reimbursement and it's based off a rebate of like sales tax production. Once somebody is in that spot, that'd be very common to do something like that. Like I say, we've already done that with Retail Connection. And ultimately, whatever you guys decide, the council will obviously come behind and consider and approve and maybe put their stamp on it as well. So those are some considerations in this. And I obviously don't want to take anything for granted. That was never our intention. We just kind of, like I said, we kind of put the cart before the horse, and the improvements were done before we had a chance to formally bring this to you guys for consideration to begin with. And that's something in terms of our process when it comes to reimbursements and economic development incentives that we're learning to tighten up as we go with each deal that kind of comes on. We're still a small growing community, and while we have a really big one in terms of the incentive projects when it comes to Joshua Station, we worked really hard on that. Some of these small ones kind of fall through the cracks, and so we kind of have to bring them after the fact. But we're tightening up their process. So we're not asking you guys to approve something after the fact anymore, because I know it puts you guys in a kind of a difficult position. So all that said, I'll entertain any questions.
Okay, so I'll start. The Rumsfeld bill here for $23,000. That's what we're talking about first. This concrete driveway and parking lot, for those, I don't know who knows and doesn't know that they're the owners of that whole strip now where Hickory Tree is, correct?
A lot of it, yeah. They're not all. They don't own the entire thing, but they own a big portion of it.
Okay.
Right.
So the driveway and parking lot is exactly where? I was kind of skimmed through here hoping to see a map.
Yeah, and what I should have done is I should have put in obviously a visual of downtown. So if you look at the strip, I don't know if we can bring that up.
Because what was behind that building, between the building and the railroad tracks,
Yeah, we're not talking about
the
that.
city do that, right?
Yeah, so there's the main strip that starts with Hickory Tree on the south end and ends with the Maddox property before where the building ends, and then there's a space, right? And then there's Miko's, and then there's the pet place, and then there's what's 10th Street, and then the next lot over is the place we're talking about. So
Okay, so that new building they just built.
yes, the new building. So all the parking that you see there is in the city right of way, and so it's public parking. So all the parking in front of Hickory Tree, all the way down that's all city right of way. So that's all public parking as well. And the city did all of that. So any of the parking downtown is going to be to serve any of the businesses that are located in the area.
Okay, so when they build a business, normally they'd be required to provide X amount of parking generally, right?
That's true, but like we've talked about in some other projects, it's been a while, but our current subdivision regulations, which were actually it's in the zoning, there's some conflict there, is that in a heritage overlay district, commercial businesses aren't required to provide parking. So we have this contradiction in our zoning ordinance that speaks to the number of public parking spaces that businesses have to provide. And then another part of the zoning code, it says commercial businesses in the heritage overlay don't actually have to provide the parking. So we're cleaning that up now. As a matter of fact, the zoning ordinance should be coming before the council, the P&Z, and the council in the next month or two. And we're going to get all that straightened out. But as it stands right now, they're not actually required to put in the parking. So the city, and if you guys remember this, there was this property across the street, the old hotel that ended up having to get raised because it was substandard. A big hiccup there was the use that they wanted to have. They could not make the parking spaces fit for the use that they wanted. Even though they were required to put in a number of parking, they actually had residential spots on top. And that triggered, because they were residential, it was a residential use and not a commercial use. It actually did trigger the number of required parking spots. Had they had nothing but commercial use, they wouldn't have had to put in parking. The city would have had to come up with something to facilitate that project. So we're in a little bit of a purgatory when it comes to parking downtown because of the way the zoning ordinance and the special district overlay regulations contradict each other right now, which we're trying to get that cleared up, or we will be getting that cleared up in the next zoning update. But as it stands right now, their commercial businesses can come in because number one, there's zero setbacks. That's something else that we're trying to.
That's what I was about to ask next. So they could have built their building all the way up at the sidewalk.
Well, no, they couldn't have because what you see in terms of, well, yeah, they could have, but there certainly is. They could have built it all the way to the public right of way, right? And then we would have had to at some point. They couldn't, just because they built a building there doesn't mean the city was going to be forced to go in there and put all the infrastructure in. But yes, they did build to the property line, and then they went in and did the improvements, the public improvements, just like any my subdivision, Cooper Valley. Which is what I would consider kind of a typical subdivision where you got sidewalks. A lot of people don't understand that the inside of that sidewalk all the way to the curb is technically city right of way. So, but there's a setback when it comes to building residences. You don't have that in our commercial areas right now because of the zoning ordinance. So yes, they could build technically right up to the property line. And then because the right of way is so wide, because if you remember, this used to be the state highway, right? Main Street. So it's really wide. The right of way is really wide there. That's why you see it so far back off the actual parkway or the street area, but that's still city right of way. So if the developer comes in and puts it in, like Mr. Rumfeld has done in this respect, or the city did it further up the block, that's all city right of way.
Okay, because to be honest with you, I've driven by that all the time, and I've never actually looked to see where the parking spots are and where right-of-way would have been and sidewalk and that kind of thing. I'm just a little bit taken back, like you pointed out, that the business could have gone in and actually provided no parking spaces of their own and just expected customers to have used the street and whatever else they could find.
Well, I mean, I guess in a very literal way of looking at it, yes, they could have built the building and not put in any sidewalks or any parking, and then that's where the customers would have just parked in the dirt, because there's nothing that says that the city would have had to do X, Y, and Z.
So that right of way you talk about of the road would have just been dirt. They've basically paved the right of way.
Right. Yeah. The public improvements that facilitate the business, they've constructed them.
Okay. Because I don't remember any conversations before about any discussions, about that property specifically. And
Yeah. Well, that's what I led this entire
coming
thing.
up.
Yeah, that's what I led this entire thing with. Is in retrospect, in any other project, what we're trying to do now, what we are doing now, is tightening up that at the very beginning. So any person agreement is agreed to at the outset before they even start construction.
Yeah, that's the biggie here.
Yeah. So we just got kind of cart behind the horse.
So then the next question would then be, are these charges for that square footage reasonable? And
yeah, so the first thing we did when we received the initial cost of this was had our public works director look into the square footage of the construction, and he verified that these were what's the word I'm looking for?
Reasonable.
Legitimate and reasonable cost. And then we got the invoices, because initially we just got an invoice that just had $23,000 on it. I was like, well, that's not going to work. We got to actually show where they actually paid this much for this stuff before I can take it to our boards to have to reimburse for that. So we have the invoices. That's in your packet. We have the invoices that they paid to Jasco Construction for these specific line items, and those are highlighted. And then we had our public works director, who's very versed in these. It's just flat work. Ultimately, it's just we don't even really depending on when there are curbs and stuff, specifically curbs and curb cuts involved. We don't even inspect, and we don't even permit flat work. It's just sidewalks and parking spaces, parking lots, that sort of thing, pavement. So it's very, very simple and very easy to verify the cost per square footage on this. And our public works director, Kristen Kubicek, verified this for us. So.
And then, did they have to follow any rules about how many were handicap spots, or did they even have to provide a handicap spot? Is anything identified as such?
They did provide that, but that's going to be more of a facilitation for the state law, right? So again, because they're commercial, no parking regulations apply. So no, they didn't have to provide any X number of parking spaces or they didn't have to be a certain distance apart, a width, or, the typical things, the things that you typically see of that in our zoning ordinance when it comes to how many there have to be per square footage of the building, per use, the width and depth of any of those things, how many have to be handicapped, because those regulations don't apply to commercial uses and heritage overlay. There was nothing
that loophole is just kind of shocking.
Absolutely. No, I get it. Yeah. And that's why we're trying to close it right now.
And then one last thing. So those parking spots technically aren't just theirs. They can't sign those and say their business only now. So from here to out, it's going to be up to everybody just to remember that there's a function going on downtown. They can't block those spots.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
And that's going to be a main difference. And that's something that I know the other reason we agreed, we entered into these conversations with Mr. Rumfeld initially, is because he's very well aware of that. This isn't just for this business, nor are the other ones. I mean, anytime you park in front of the Main Street Parlor, you can go into Hickory Tree, right, and vice versa. We have some spots on the other side of the street because that the right of way is pretty wide there. Where we've actually done some improvements. People park over there and walk across the street. If and when there's another a venue or business that pops up on that side, then you park wherever you can find the parking. That's how public parking works. It's very similar to Old Town, where, you might have to park over by Bays, but then you walk over to Grumps, or that sort of thing. So this is just like that.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I beat that up. Anybody else? Please ask questions. Anything?
I think you covered it.
Yeah, no questions here.
And then, so the first couple of pages there were the receipts from Rumsfeld. They show what they paid and whatnot. Find that $23,000 invoice. There's a letter in there. Then we go into Exhibit A, which was our incentive program guidelines. That's the other part you started talking about going forward. We wanted to try to standardize.
That's a good point, Darren. So with Joshua Station and the Retail Connection, the Chapter 380 agreement that we have with them is based on these guidelines. Okay, so the incentive to the Retail Connection is the rebate, or are the rebates for property taxes and sales tax based on these guidelines. Now, we specifically, when I first arrived here, we had no guidelines or program in terms of economic development incentives because we wanted to maintain some flexibility in what we did and have a case-by-case basis when it came to different projects. But we found it very difficult because people would say, what kind of incentives do you have? And there's really nothing we could give them or point them to. So what we did was come up with this, which is not, we were very clear on what it's a guideline to kind of give the EDCs and ultimately the council some direction on what people may or may not qualify for. And this is what I was getting at when it comes to how reimbursement of specific costs by the private developer are rebated or reimbursed to them. So I think it would be very just in line with our guidelines to, rather than say we approve this reimbursement, write them a check, to tie the reimbursement to once a tenant is there and it's actually producing sales tax for the city, that we rebate, even if it's 100% of that. I mean, we're only talking $23,000. So if it's 100% of sales tax receipts until the reimbursed $23,000, I think that'd be fine too. So, we're talking about one area here in one business. So you do have, and it's just not, usually when you're talking about big projects like we are with Joshua Station, I mean, it was ultimately like that's a $3 million project. So these guidelines actually make a little bit more sense because of the amount of money involved in the investment. What we're talking about here really isn't quite meant for these guidelines, but it still can be a basis from which we base the reimbursement off of. If you guys decided, you ultimately want to do that. And like I mentioned earlier, I acknowledge the fact you guys are kind of at a catch-22 here. You almost can't not approve it, and that's I'll take responsibility for that, for letting things kind of get ahead of me before I brought it to you guys. But I can certainly present the idea. I think the council would probably be on board with this. I don't want to speak for the council, but when and if and when the location that these improvements are supposed to facilitate starts producing fruit for the city and the community, then that's when the rebates or reimbursements happen. I think that it's very common, and I don't think that Mr. Rumsfeld would have any issues with that.
Sure. Okay. Well, I just wanted to draw a line between item F is us taking action on that $23,000 bill. The other parts in there, the guidelines, that was the discussion for future.
Well, yeah, yes and no. So I could always, if you guys want this to be more of a work session and then I actually bring you guys an actual Chapter 380 agreement that spells all this stuff out, a la like we have with Retail Connection, I think that'd be fine too. I don't think Mr. Rumsfeld is any, chomping at the bit in any hurry. He needs this money yesterday or anything. I think that would be fine if you guys want to, this would be more of an informational type deal and actually bring the actual agreement to you guys next month and you can consider it and approve it at that point. I mean, whatever form you guys want this to take, we can certainly, get that done.
So the word reimbursement there for that money is what's open for discussion still, whether we're just saying, yeah, write them a check, or whether we're saying, let's review options.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure everybody else, maybe everybody else was up to speed or not, but
Well, we could very easily, I don't think we technically, because again, I don't want to minimize any type of investment that even our private, developers put into the city, and any dollar they put in is going to be welcome. And I also don't want to dismiss or any type of, no matter what the amount is, if it's 5,000 or 500,000, like we're doing with Joshua Station, any type of reimbursement that we use, our sales tax revenues to fill. But if you guys have some options. If y'all want an actual 380 agreement that like we have with Retail Connection, if that's what you want to approve, we can do that. If you guys want to move tonight to base the reimbursement off of that, we can do that through the minutes, right? It'd be more formal, obviously, with the Chapter 380 agreement, a formal agreement, but we can certainly base on whatever you guys, if y'all want to start that now, if y'all want to put that off until next month and have a formal agreement in place before you decide.
well, my opinion is we go, this is feast or famine. We go from 1 month where there's really nothing on the agenda to think about and talk about, and where all of a sudden there's a lot hitting us with, right?
Right? Sure.
I think personally, if there's time on that receipt, that bill, things to talk about, because you sat there and talked 20 minutes about it, and I guarantee that opened a bunch of questions in people's minds. So maybe we do need to just bring that back up for another discussion at a different time. Does anybody else concur? Okay, well, if not, then I'll take motions to proceed
Well,
however we want to proceed.
I do have a question. It's not going to change the fact that we're reimbursing him, is it?
No, it's just, yeah, Shelley, that's a good point. It's just a matter of when, I guess. We were either doing it sooner or later. We're doing it via basically a cash reimbursement based on the invoices we received, or we do a cash reimbursement based off of if and when sales tax.
Yeah, so that's what it is. When they would start paying sales tax, that's when we start deferring, or not deferring, but kind of offsetting this expense. They're paying themselves back, basically, with the sales tax.
And frankly, I don't think, again, like I said, I don't want to minimize the dollars. I think just based off of how much we're talking about and the net financial position that Type A is in, it's kind of you guys are in a really, really enviable spot right now to be able to consider this in real time. It's not something like with the Joshua Station development that we really need that to be on the ground and developing and creating and producing before we even think about rebating that money. This project is a little bit different, a little bit apples and oranges, but it's completely up to you guys.
So I've got this straight in my mind. We are going to reimburse the amount, and that's what we would be voting on tonight, to go ahead and reimburse it as it is with no so-called strings attached.
Well, that's an easy way to put it. Sure.
Okay. Or we can wait and vote to reimburse and have the strings attached.
Or reimburse once it's generating sales tax. Once
Yeah, that's what I mean by the strings.
right.
Yeah, which that leads to the next question is, what kind of business is going there? If it's like the doctor's office where we don't generate any sales tax.
Yeah, so if you look, that's another thing that I have to give some credit to Miranda for going back at Mr. Rumfeld on this, because initially we weren't very impressed with the application. Okay, didn't really give us a lot of data. But if you look at when you go into the there is he does talk about it just being ready for a new tenant, but the all indications is it's going to be another eating place, right? So there's some improvements when it comes to plumbing that only facilitate a kitchen.
Okay.
right? That sort of thing. And then another thing that we asked him to kind of give us an estimate on is the number of new jobs this would create based off of the history that we have and experience we have with Hickory Tree. Typically speaking, when you're looking at economic development policy, you're going to see about, you usually want to see about one job for every $50,000 of incentives invested. And we're less than half of that. And he's contemplating 35 new jobs. I think Hickory Tree at its apex before the virus hit, as we all know, we saw how busy that place was about 35 new jobs. And obviously there's going to be a mix of full and part-time equivalent. So I would consider probably half that in terms of full-time equivalents for this new space, which is well beyond what we would be investing, ultimately. And I think it's an important point of any consideration is how much are we putting in versus how much the community is going to be getting out of it. And if Hickory Tree has been any indication, we're going to be getting way more out of this than what we put into it.
Yeah, and really at the end of the day, Joshua paid for parking, paid for concrete, paid for parking, which is improvements to the downtown. So
Right.
they're there. So I'm all for paying bills,
Yes.
and we got value for the bill. Whoever does the equivalence and says it was worth it. So I'll take the word for it. So I'm not by any means. I don't want to give the impression that I've got a problem with it.
No, I haven't gotten that impression.
I'm open to entertain motions to settle it today, however we want to do it.
I think I'd like to make a motion to approve the economic development reimbursement request for Rumfield Properties, because, if anything, if he hadn't done it, if he hadn't made, I understand that they own those properties, but at the end of the day, we're wanting that downtown improvement. We're wanting other businesses to know that, Joshua is wanting to encourage businesses to take that initiative and get it done. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the reimbursement now.
I second it, that we do it.
Show of hands. All right. Thank you all for indulging all that long discussion.
No, it's a good discussion. It's not something that, because, like Josh said, put the cart before the horse. And so it does need its due diligence as far as discussion. So,
Well, it also talked a lot onto responsibilities of type A. It talks about vision, where we're going, how we got where we are. It is, we don't, like he said, it's kind of a loophole in the rules, but we're going to work on that.
Right. And it just brings to light of something to be mindful of going forward, that the next time that we're in this position, that we go about it differently.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the, let me scroll up, proposed.
Well, hold on. We have a motion and a second to approve. We haven't had.
I did a show of hands.
We did. We voted.
I'm sorry.
But let's do it again. Show of hands for the motion to approve the payment to
Okay.
Rumfield.
Sorry about that.
3,000. Okay. Item G, discuss, consider, and take action on approval of an amendment to the fiscal year 2019-20 annual operating budget.
Yeah, so obviously we did not budget this reimbursement initially. So usually, and this is to be new for Shelley and probably Melissa, usually I wait toward the end of the fiscal year to do an amendment. We'll kind of do some things along the way. We have something big where I really need the board's approval to really even think about adding it in, or just getting their blessing on it, understanding that it's going to be in an amended budget later on before the fiscal year ends. But I just wanted to go ahead and get this one done. I do not foresee, based on what I've seen in our financials year to date, that I anticipate us having another amendment later on in the year. So what you'll see in the amendment here is in your amended column. So it's going to say FYE, so that's fiscal year ending 2020. That's going to be your amended column, and the difference you'll see there is in the capital outlay line of $11,500. Now, I made a bit of a mistake. That's half of the cost, obviously, if you can do math. So that is what I'm going to need, if we can either table this item and I can do it later with the correct number in there in the actual form that you see, or we can go ahead and adopt this amendment now, and then I can come back later and then do an amendment later to do the other half. Initially, what I had done was split the cost, right? Like we've done so many times in other issues between type A and type B, and this is what I'll have to explain to them in a few minutes on their amendment, which isn't going to be needed anymore. But so that number is actually going to be 23,000 in that capital outlay line and not the 11,500. So we can either table it tonight and I can amend the budget later, or we can go ahead and do it. I can do another one later with the other half in there. It's really up to you guys.
Did you not say before when we were talking about the audit that every amendment ends up with another, up at the top, every time the budget is amended, that you're having to add another column showing those amendments?
No, well, in the audit, you have an original. Okay, so that's the one we adopt before October 1st.
Okay.
And then the final. The final in the audit is going to be whatever the last amended budget says.
Okay. I thought you were saying you had to do something every time you amended it.
No.
Okay.
So and really, when it comes to the amendment, it's six one way, half a dozen the other. Whether you want to print this tonight or table it, I can do it later with the correct number in there.
I think it probably makes sense to just table it and do it correctly one time so that it shows that actual amount.
I agree. I agree.
And that also gives type B the opportunity in a few minutes to volunteer to pay that other half. I don't want to deprive them of the opportunity.
No pressure, Pam.
Okay, so in that regard, then Darren, we just will not take any action tonight on that item.
Correct.
Okay. Duly noted.
Okay.
I'm gonna roll back up, see where I am.
H.
So we're at H, receive and discuss update on the status of the Joshua Station and the Retail Connection Chapter 380 Economic Development Project.
Yeah, so what you see before you is just a timeline. We have Pacheco Coke. If you remember, they're the engineering firm that has been helping us with they helped us with the traffic visibility study for the Joshua Station project that was recently approved by TxDOT a few weeks ago. That project has been permitted. So what you're seeing before you tonight is the engineering timeline to get the actual plans drawn up and everything engineered to get it to TxDOT for approval. I will have an additional timeline, hopefully in the next couple of months, that also includes the bidding and construction timeline. So that would obviously be added on to the end of this. So we're looking at probably September by the time we get this all to TxDOT and they've reviewed it. Then you're probably looking at about another 3 to 6 months on bidding and construction. So we're looking at the beginning of first quarter of next year when you would start seeing dirt turn. Which we knew this. We knew this is how it works. A lot of people don't understand that how much work goes into these projects. Many people don't think that unless dirt is moving and they see construction happening, that nothing's happening. But a lot of this front end work obviously has to be done at the beginning. And the city itself will be letting this project. So once we get everything designed, Pacheco Cope will help us with the bidding process, just like Tignall and Perkins did on the drainage projects that we're doing with the bond money we have. Whenever we do projects, anything $50,000 over and over, we have to bid those projects. So the city will go through that process. Pacheco Cope will help us administer that, and then do the construction inspection phase as well once that gets started. So this, what you see before you, is we want to give you a heads up in terms of the tentative timeline on when we can expect to hear back from TxDOT on approvals of the engineering and the construction plans.
Okay.
Now, as it stands right now, just as an aside, for those of you who weren't here last summer, and to remind those of you who were, in the budget right now, we do have $150,000 that we budgeted to transfer to the CIP, right, as a placeholder for the improvements for this project. This project comes in at just a little bit over $500,000 when it's all said and done, at least the initial estimates. This is in the TIF area, and so the TIF money that the general fund has in its reserves is restricted use for this area. So those funds, some 490,000 that are in that fund right now will go toward obviously the lion's share of these improvements with the type A making up the difference, however much that is. So we've already set aside $150,000 for that. I doubt that we're going to tap into that money this fiscal year because of where we're at. You know, what you're seeing here now is we will. That money can be used on engineering and design and construction. So we'll probably be tapping into the TIF funds to pay, you know, the engineering costs along the way, and want to put off maybe you guys using your funds to the tail end and really the construction part of things. So we're already, you know, that was the plan last summer after we adopted this agreement with Retail Connection. And so we put that money aside to help facilitate these improvements. So everything's kind of, luckily so far it's going according to plan. So I'm very excited about it. I hope you guys are too. So if you have any questions about the timeline or the project in general, I'd be happy to entertain them.
So that was just a discussion part of it. So anybody
Yes,
just
that's
talk
why
about it some more. All right. Well, then any suggestions for future items? I hate to cut this short. I was going for a record meeting, I thought. All right. Well, then, Josh, if you don't have anything else, nobody else has anything else.
I have a quick question for Josh. Josh, you mentioned we were below 10,000 in population, which I know everybody knows that, but do you know what the 2020 census projections are for Joshua?
We don't have the 2020 census projections yet, but we do have the projections for the North Texas Central COG, the Central Council of Government. That has us right over 8,000 people, which would be about a 2,600 person increase from what our signs say right now. Now, granted, our signs are a little bit behind. You know, we've been at the 72 to 7,500 point for a little bit now, certainly since last summer, or the last estimates that came in from the COG last time. But the most recent COG, we get those on April 1st of every year. And so when the COG estimates came out, that had us just over 8,000 people.
Okay.
So yeah, we're getting up there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then at 7:40 p.m., I'm adjourning the Type A board meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.